humiliated and shamed. The president's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, just sentenced to 47 months. That is 1 month shy of 4 years for running a global scheme to avoid paying millions in taxes, defrauding banks. Now, these are all charges that came from the Mueller team. Manafort spoke for about 4 minutes, telling the judge, "I know it is my conduct that brought me here. My life personally and professionally is in shambles." Now, I just want to emphasize here, this is a remarkable moment in history, right? The campaign chairman of a presidential campaign sentenced to prison, going to handcuffs, 47 months. But I want to say this is a big blow for Mueller as well. They had asked for 19 to 25 years. The judge, T.S. Ellis, going against that request from prosecutors and going for only 47 months. So that is a stunning development. Obviously, Manafort's going to be sentenced again in a week in the D.C. court. But this is not what Team Mueller had been hoping for. Now, Manafort is the first person from Trump's inner circle to be sentenced. He was, of course, the first person who was indicted by Mueller. I want to go now to Shimon Prokupecz out front outside the Virginia courthouse. Shimon, this is not what Team Mueller wanted. They wanted up to 25 years, 47 months. That's what they got.
Way lower than what really anyone expected, Erin. When you think about it, way lower than what the prosecutors, what the special counsel's office wanted here. They wanted up to 25 years. Instead, they get just under 4 years. We're talking about a 47-month prison sentence for Paul Manafort, which could reasonably mean that he will not have to spend the rest of his life in prison. Yeah. Obviously, that was a big concern for him, for his family. As you said, he stood up. He sat, actually. He didn't stand up. He stayed in his wheelchair. He was brought here in a wheelchair. He spoke to the judge for about 4 minutes. He asked the judge for compassion. And it's clearly seems that that is what the judge here did, sentencing him to 47 months, well below what anyone had wanted from the special counsel's office, well below what prosecutors had asked for. And the judge just really finding, it seems, compassion here, sentencing him to the 47 months.
All right, Shimon, thank you very much. And I just want to actually, Shimon, as a follow there, you've got this sentencing. Obviously, we're waiting for Manafort, his team to leave. As you said, he's in a wheelchair. He has a cane. A remarkable downturn in his physical appearance, right? From a man who had, colored his hair and so prized his personal appearance with his fancy clothes. He's going to turn 70 next month. So this is an incredible leniency from this judge. But there is another judge right next week sentencing Manafort, and that sentence would go on top of this one.
It could go on top of it. It could run concurrent, which would mean that Paul Manafort would serve it together with this. He's facing a substantial amount of prison time as well. But given the way the judge here treated him, this could affect how the judge sees him in the Washington, D.C. case. He is facing about 10 years or so in Washington, D.C. But it all depends on what the judge there finds. Certainly, this judge, seeing some room for leniency, went ahead and gave him the 47 months. The other thing for folks to keep in mind is that in the D.C. case, this is where he was going to cooperate. This is where he pleaded guilty and then decided he was going to cooperate with prosecutors. And then he started lying. So that ended. And it's not clear what effect that may have on the sentencing ultimately. But certainly the fact that he's only getting about 4 years here, I think is going to play a role in what happens now in Washington, D.C.
And look, it is a stunning development. All right, Shimon, as you get more, let us know. And obviously, our Evan Perez is inside that courtroom. So as we get more color, the dramatic testimony, final words from Manafort saying he's been ashamed, his life is in a shambles, making the case to the judge, who obviously was moved by that and Manafort all the way along the line, resulting in this incredibly lenient relative to prosecutors' request sentence. I want to go now, as we await them leaving this courtroom and get more from Evan, I want to go to the Democratic Senator from Connecticut, Richard Blumenthal, who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, also as an Attorney General for Connecticut. 47 months. Fair?
Well, it has to be a disappointment to the prosecution, and the prosecution was well deserved in trying to seek a longer term. Obviously, the judge has demonstrated some hostility before now to Robert Mueller.
Yes.
But the point is there's going to be another reckoning for Manafort. And it will be a reckoning from a judge who has taken very serious note that he has shown no remorse. Right. And no respect for the law.
Now, I want to be clear. When he said to the judge, he spoke for about 4 minutes. He did not say he was sorry. He did not express remorse. We know that he had cooperated, and prosecutors said that cooperation was a load of baloney. They spent 50 hours questioning him because he kept lying and misleading, and he never really cooperated, even though he said he was. So 4 minutes he spoke to the judge. He said he felt humiliated and shamed, would be a gross understatement. The last 2 years have been the most difficult years for my family and I. Those are the things he talked about. He did not apologize. And yet this judge clearly taking his side. This is a judge who, I want to remind everyone, Senator, when this all started, said to Mueller's team, you don't care about Mr. Manafort's bank fraud. You really care about what information Manafort can give you that would reflect on Mr. Trump or lead to his prosecution or impeachment.
And I'm going to speak as a former prosecutor, as well as the Attorney General of the state, a federal prosecutor, as well as state Attorney General. This sentence, in my view, failed to do justice to the very serious crimes that Manafort has committed, as well as his utter disrespect for the law, feeling he is above the law, lying after his conviction about his giving polling data to the Russians while he was the Trump campaign manager, lying about his other conversations with the Russians, other kinds of untruths after his conviction. And
I want to be clear, a jury, right? A jury of his citizens, his fellow citizens, is who convicted him after a 3-week trial on all of these counts. Evan Perez was in the courtroom. All right, Evan, you've been inside all day. You've been waiting. You saw the 4 minutes of Manafort addressing the judge. Tell us everything you can.
Well, Aaron, you could hear a pin drop inside that courtroom as Manafort finally spoke. And let me tell you, one of the things that the judge raised when he finally announced the sentencing is that nowhere in Manafort's statement did he say that he was sorry for violating the law. And he said, the judge said, I was surprised that I did not hear you express regret. He says, I hope you reflect on that. And the fact that you did not comply with the law. And I think that's one of the things that the judge was struggling with here today. He said that 19 to 24 years was way too much. He says it was excessive. He says it was out of whack with the level of the crime that Paul Manafort had committed here. He cited a lot of cases, some of the cases that he had heard in this very courtroom, that he said he gave people probation or just a few months in prison. So he was struggling with the idea of sentencing Paul Manafort to 19 to 24 years in prison. But he also said that this was obviously a very serious crime, and that's why he arrived eventually at 47 months, so just under 4 years. I think a lot of people were surprised. You could see the look of astonishment on the look of a couple of on the faces of a couple of the prosecutors at the prosecution table. I think the defense has to be pretty happy with this result. And look, I think as the defense described, what they said that Paul Manafort had the ability to pay a $25 million fine, $25 million in restitution and an additional fine. You could see Mrs. Manafort sitting in the front row, shaking her head no. One of the prosecutors, Mr. Osanye, mentioned the fact that Paul Manafort still has ownership of two homes, one in Florida and one here in Alexandria, and he says the prosecution argued that Mr. Manafort had the ability to pay an additional fine on top of the $25 million that the judge just ordered him to pay. In the end, the judge decided that he was not going to impose that additional fine, but you could see that Mrs. Manafort was not in agreement with the idea of paying anything more than the restitution that he's already have to pay.
All right, so I just want to go inside that room to that moment. You're saying you could hear a pin drop. There was a look of astonishment on some of the prosecutors' faces. What was the attitude of Paul Manafort in the 4 minutes that he was speaking? Did he come off to you, Evan, watching him as defiant, as pathetic? I mean, I know he's sitting there in a wheelchair with a cane. I mean, he has his hair is now gray. He used to color it. I mean, he looks like a broken man. But what was it was like in those 4 minutes watching him?
Well, it's a vast difference from the Paul Manafort we saw. He was certainly a lot cockier when he was showing up with his tailored suits before 9 months ago when the judge decided to throw him in jail for witness tampering. And so he was a different man. Obviously, he spoke a lot more quietly. The judge asked him to speak more loudly because he couldn't hear him. And so eventually you could hear him in the courtroom. And look, he spoke very, very emotionally about the impact on his family. He said that this has been embarrassing and humiliating for his professional and his personal life. He also talked about the impact on his family. His wife was sitting just a few feet behind him.
Is he crying during all of this, or just
during the break? During the break, after he finished his remarks, during those 4 minutes, he turned and looked at his wife, and you could see his eyes were moist. They were a little red. And she just sat there silently as he spoke, and then eventually he just sat there quietly with his hands on his chin, sort of as his lawyers and everybody else in the courtroom sort of milled about. And so you could see that this was a moment where everything perhaps was finally hitting Paul Manafort after this 2 years of this investigation.